addition to the amazing community and the guidance that I get from Rabbi Matinki, I get the privilege of also getting to sit and learn from Rabbi Reiss, the Av Basin, and we've had so many opportunities as a community to learn together with and from Rabbi Reiss, and today is another opportunity to thank Rabbi Reiss as always for giving us over the guidance of the Torah, and we look forward to another outstanding shir from the Av Basin.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Reiss, and this is Rabbi Matinki. It's always difficult on Tisha B'Av. I say every year, and I'll keep on saying it, until the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, that I really hate Tisha B'Av. It's the one day of the year that I absolutely can't stand. And the thing that I can't stand about Tisha B'Av is that you're not allowed to greet people. You're not allowed to say hello to them, and if they say hello to you, you're not really supposed to respond in kind. You're supposed to kind of have a very solemn and sullen look on your face, the Kohen Rosh, and you kind of indicate this is not a day to exchange greetings. So at the very least, we can say nice things about each other, I guess, without violating the prohibition of greeting each other. So I appreciate Rabbi Bressler's nice words, and obviously I feel similarly about the ability to sit regularly next to Rabbi Matinki and Rabbi Bressler and to enjoy their divrei Torah and insights. The Yerushalmi in Yona tells us that Kol Dor Shelo Nimna Beis Hamikdash B'Yamo, every single generation the Beis Hamikdash is not rebuilt. Ki'ilu Hu Haribo. It's as if that generation, those people, have destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. It's a terrible indictment of all of us that not only do we suffer and wallow in the depression and desolation of being in galus and exile, of not having the Beis Hamikdash rebuilt, but we're held responsible for it. We're viewed as the guilty parties who have actually destroyed the Beis Hamikdash during our time. How could it be? We were born into this state of not having a Beis Hamikdash. How could we be held accountable for destroying it? So the answer is that it's our job to bring about the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash by doing tshuva for all of the sins that caused the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And if the Beis Hamikdash has not been rebuilt, it means that we have not done adequate tshuva. So it occurred to me that perhaps as a focus for the Tisha B'Av presentation this year, I would focus on all of the reasons that are given by Chazal, by our rabbis in the Gemara, as to why it is that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, why it is that Yerushalayim was destroyed. So we can look at all the different reasons, and we can think to ourselves, how can we repair this? How can we make things better? How can we do the proper repentance so that we will be worthy of the Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt? The Gemara in Tainus kind of sets the tone. And it starts off by telling us that the first thing you have to do is what we're doing right now. The first thing you have to do is mourn the Beis Hamikdash. If you mourn the Beis Hamikdash, you mourn the destruction, it shows that you care. So then you are eligible of having the Beis Hamikdash rebuilt. If you don't mourn the Beis Hamikdash, so then you're not going to have the merit of being able to see it in all of its splendor, in all of its glory. There has to be a sensitivity towards the fact that we're missing something. I said that this was on some level one of the I suppose silver linings of the entire COVID pandemic that we suffered through during this past year is that we realized how much it's important to us to gather together, to be able to have minyanim, to be able to go to shul, to be able to send our children to schools, that we felt this tremendous, profound sense of loss, and it was something that we could then build upon and say, look, we feel this profound sense of loss of not being able to go to our Beis Knesset, to our Beis Hamikdash Me'at, was considered to be a miniature Beis HaMikdash, so shouldn't we have this same profound feeling of loss and desolation and yearning and striving with respect to having the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt in Yerushalayim, to be able to serve the Kadosh Baruch Hu in the optimal fashion, Ki Beisi Beis Tefillah Yikarei L'Kol Ha'amim, in the ultimate Beis of Tefillah, with the bringing of Korbanos, with the Hashra Shechina, with the divine presence finally residing in the same obvious and public and evident manner that it had been in the days of old. And that obviously is something that we should build upon. And it's interesting, one of my neighbors made the conclusion during the COVID epidemic. He was a businessman, and he was going to work every single day, and then COVID shut things down, so he had to work from home, and he realized he could get all of his work done at home. So at a certain point he turned to his family and he said, I don't really have to go into the office, I can get everything done at home, so if I'm sitting in my house anyway, and I'm able to make a parnasa, and I'm able to make a living, and I'm able to take care of everything, why sit in my house in Chicago? And we may as well do this in Yerushalayim. So they picked up and they moved to Eretz Yisrael. So some of the little lessons that we can pick up in terms of not only having the yearning and the striving of being closer to the Shekhinah, but are we acting sufficiently upon it? Are we thinking about how we can make aliyah in terms of physically going to Eretz Yisrael, in terms of spiritually coming closer to the Shekhinah? So we read this morning in the Haftorah, the Haftorah spoke about how there was a great confusion regarding Amma Avda Ha'aretz. So why is it that the land was destroyed? The Gemara in Yoma, Daf Tesam and Beis, tells us why the land was destroyed, at least with the first Beis HaMikdash. There was a violation of the most serious of errors, of murder, shlichus damim, gilui arayos, of prohibited relationships, incest, adultery, and so forth, and about Zara and idolatry. So we understand why the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. But the Navi explains that no, there was still a lot of confusion. That somehow it should have been the case that we could have remained in our land, we could have kept the Beis HaMikdash, that they turned to the Zikadim, they turned to the elders, they turned to the Nevi'im, the prophets, and nobody was able to give a good answer. Explains the Gemara based on the Psukim in Yirmiyahu. And finally, Kadosh Baruch Hu himself says, V'yomer Hashem, you want to know why it is I had to destroy the Beis HaMikdash? It was Allah's Bamis Torah Si. Because you forsook my Torah. If you would have not forsaken the Torah, you would have learned Torah properly, you would have been committed to looking in the Torah to figure out what you should do, even if you do the worst possible of errors. If you remain grounded in guiding your life according to the Torah, you can always bring yourselves back, even from the greatest abyss, even from the worst of possible spiritual place. You can always bring yourself back if you're prepared to do a Kabbalah Satorah. That's why Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim had descended to the 49th rung of Tumah. There were only 50 rungs of defilement of Tumah, and they had already reached number 49, so they needed the 49 days until they got to the 50th day after the Pesach, after the counting of the Sphira, right, to undo all of those 49 levels of defilement. But why were they able to undo the 49 levels of defilement? Because at the end of the journey, at the end of that 50-day period, they had Kabbalah Satorah. They were prepared to accept the Torah. If you're prepared to accept the Torah, so then all is going to be fine. So it's because Allah's Vam is Torasi. But shouldn't the Nevi'im, the prophets, have been able to figure that out themselves? Why do they need a Kadosh Baruch Hu to tell them, Allah's Vam is Torasi, that you have forsaken the Torah? So the Ran, in his commentary to the Gemara in Nedarim, quotes the Rabbi Yona and says that they were learning Torah. They were learning plenty of Torah. We have plenty of yeshivas, Baruch Hashem, Bati Midrashas. They had back then too. They had plenty of Torah. So what was the real answer, the real message, and the insight that they couldn't figure out on their own, that they needed HaKadosh Baruch Hu to explain to them? So it explains the Gemara. They didn't make a blessing. When they learned Torah, they didn't make a blessing on the Torah. So what does it mean they didn't make a blessing on the Torah? Presumably, they opened up their siddur in the morning and they said the Berachos HaShachar just like we do, and they would have come across the blessing on the Torah. So Rabbi Yona explains that what it means is that they didn't view the Torah as anything that was special. They have all the different aspects of their life, and yeah, Torah is something that we do as well, but it wasn't something that they placed above and beyond all of the other items and all of the other priorities of their life. It wasn't, something that they viewed as especially holy and something which was a top priority in their life. Some explain that there is a question mark, that is a question that's posed with respect to a person who goes to work during the day. They made the Berachos HaTorah in the morning, and then they learn a little bit of Torah at the time that they're davening. Maybe they listen to a Bar Halacha after minyan. But then they're working all day. They're a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, whatever it is, and then they come home. It's already 9 o'clock at night, and they go to the base medrash again. They have to make another bracha. So the Rabbeinu Asher, famous commentator, says that the reason you don't need to make another bracha is because we assume that the entire day, all that a person has on their mind is that they want to get back to learning Torah, that they want to have that dvekus, that connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So all that they're doing in work, that's just that they can have a parnasa to take care of their family and so forth, but that they never lose their mindset about how what they ultimately really want to do is to learn Torah. So therefore, there's no hesed chadas. There is no lapse in their focus on wanting to learn Torah, and that's the reason they don't have to make a bracha at the end of the day. So the Beis Halevi explains that maybe that's the pshat, maybe that's the explanation. They didn't have that focus. That when they were at work, this was the most important thing in the world to them. The Torah wasn't on the same level of importance. They weren't thinking to themselves, oh, all I want to do is Torah, that they had such a passion, such a connection for Torah. So therefore, they really would have been obligated to make another bracha when they would learn Torah at night, but they didn't, because they relied on the bracha they made in the morning, but they had no right for that reliance. Once they were not focused on Torah fully in terms of their priorities during the rest of the day. So he explains maybe that's pshat that they didn't make a bracha beforehand. The bracha that they made at the beginning of the day didn't carry them through for the entire day. What I think maybe really what the Navi is saying and the Gemara explaining this message of Al Shalom B'Yochel B'Torah Tzachila is like somebody wrote an article in one of the Torah journals a number of years ago. I think it was a professor at Stern College, actually. His name is Rabbi Dr. Aaron Free. So he wrote an article about sort of the disconnect between Torah learning and Torah living. Sometimes people spend a lot of time in Torah learning, and they even support yeshivas and spend a lot of money to make sure that we have yeshivas and so forth. But there isn't this translation of the laws and the principles and the values that we're learning on the page in the Gemara and in the yeshiva with respect to what Torah is all about in terms of how people are living their lives. He gave an example that he was learning an entire semester, about lost objects, and then somebody discovered, a lost object and kind of took it for themselves without even thinking for 2 seconds about maybe there's a simon and I should be makris and I should make an announcement if anybody can find it. And he asked the student, why is it you didn't think of this? The student said, I just didn't think that this was necessarily applicable to real life. That there has to be an understanding that the Torah that we're learning is supposed to be lived. It's supposed to be practiced. This idea is perhaps what we find expressed in the Navi Yeshayahu, the Haftorah that we read this past the Shabbos. So we read Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos. What's Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos all about? What is this Haftorah that we read by every single year? We read it right before Tisha B'Av. So it's supposed to teach us certain things. It's supposed to inspire us. And it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is speaking through the Nebuah, through this prophecy of Yeshaya very sternly to us. He says, Shimu Dvar Hashem Ketzinei Sodom. We should listen to the words of Hashem Ketzinei Sodom. They're compared to Sodom Ba'amora, Hazinu Torah Elokeinu Am Amora. That you should listen to the real Torah. What's the real Torah? It's not just going through the lip service. It's not just going through the motions. Lamali Vosi Peichem Yomar Hashem. Not just interested in your korbanos, What I'm interested in is that you not do to'eva, that you not commit abominations, you not commit oven matzah, you not commit iniquity, and think that just because you have yeshivas, just because of the fact that you're going to shul and davening, that somehow that's going to atone for all of the terrible things that you're doing. Limdu eitei dirshu mishpat ashro kamot shitu yasam ribu al manah. Says Hashem, learn to do good, seek justice, strengthen the victim, do justice to the orphan, take up the cause of the widow, make sure that you're taking care of all of the defenseless and vulnerable people in your community, and make sure that you're not supporting any type of iniquity, that you're not supporting injustice, people who are taking advantage of others through perhaps fraudulent investment schemes, through other types of chicanery, and then using that money to build up our Torah institutions. What value is the Torah institutions if it's all based upon actions of injustice and we're not upholding what is right and what is just? So one of my Averim, a rabbi in Muncie, is very also involved in Kashas, Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Asher Bush, you may have heard of him. So he wrote a little message for this year, right before Tisha B'Av, saying how he was struck when he was going over Shabbos Chazon about how many of the criticisms, many of the points of admonition that we find in the Haftorah are really applicable to us as well. He said, I do not speak of the non-Orthodox community at all. The Navi is not speaking to or about those who have left tradition. Quite the contrary. They are regulars in the Mikdash. They daven plenty. They're good for people like us, but they've missed the boat. We pride ourselves on having more B'nai Torah than ever before, on having yeshivas of every stripe and flavor. We have more shiurim than our grandparents could ever imagine, more organizations dedicated to every cause imaginable, yet we are missing the boat. We are incredibly careful about what comes into our mouths, but are we nearly as careful about what comes out of our mouths? So it should be a little surprise that the same issues the Navi cried about 3,000 years ago are the same ones today. Corruption, double standards, and abuse of the weak and vulnerable. Sure, we have all the great excuses and lumdus to explain, but we don't need to waste our time with justifications, as Yeshayahu already said all that needs to be said. Perhaps we might be able to sleep at night if it was only private individuals, but how many communal institutions are no better? So if it was only criticism he was heaping against communal institutions, so I could probably live with that a little bit, but he doesn't stop there. And justice, well, how many Batei Din are there? You see, this cuts a little bit too close to my heart. How many Batei Din are there where a person can really go to knowing that justice will be served? No bribery, no cronyism, no ex parte communications, no monkey business, just plain old truth and justice. As a young man who had a financial dispute recently commented to me, Basin is where the dishonest people go. How painful and sad. He's very, very strong Musar, really for all of us. Obviously, those of us who are involved with communal leadership, with the Batei Din, so we have to be very, very careful to make sure that standards of integrity are upheld. I actually made a point to some of my colleagues in the Based in world this past year that we got into the point where I see behavior, everyone has to, we have a principle, you have to make sure that you are squeaky clean before you can criticize others, and I'm always, open to criticism. We should all be. It's very important that we look into ourselves and figure out how we can do things better, but I found that certainly there were practices that bothered me along these lines of what I had seen in certain institutions, and I mentioned that it's really important for our community is that those Batei Din that are committed to integrity, that are committed to professionalism, I hope we are, that certainly is what we strive to do and to accomplish. We should all band together. We should have some type of a group, a consortium of a Batei Din that all have similar protocols and standards that we can vouch for and that we can vouch that others are following as well, so that we can point to members of the community in the proper direction to say these are Batei Din that should be utilized and these are Batei Din that should not be utilized, that there should be some sort of modicum of standards that everybody everybody understands that they're supposed to follow in order to avoid some of these vicissitudes that are decried by the Navi. So what is, though, sort of, according to the Gemara, the ultimate pitfall that leads us to all of the sins, that leads us to all of the problems that we have today? So we know what it is. It's sinas chinam. That's what the Gemara in Yuma Daf Tesam and Reiss says, that the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam. It didn't have the problems of bloodshed and of illicit relations and of idolatry, but the major problem that it had was sinas chinam, was a baseless hatred. So we understand baseless hatred is something that should be avoided. But do we understand the nature of baseless hatred? Do we understand exactly how we go about overcoming this idea of a baseless hatred? So the Gemara in Gittin tells the story, of course, of Kamsu Bar Kamsa saying Yerushalayim was destroyed based on Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. He was a man who made a simcha and he invited, he had a friend, Kamsa, and he had an enemy, Bar Kamsa, and the wrong person got invited, the enemy rather than the friend, and when he discovered Bar Kamsa was there, he said, you got to leave, and Bar Kamsa was very embarrassed. This was in front of everybody. He said, he'll pay for everybody's meal if you can only stay, and the person was relentless and said, no, you have to leave, and he embarrassed him in front of everybody, including the rabbis who were sitting there. There were distinguished rabbis who were sitting there. This is part of the problem. When the rabbis don't speak up on behalf of justice and they allow a person to be shamed and humiliated in public, maybe because the individual making the simcha was a prominent, prestigious, chashuv person in the community, but as a result, Bar Kamsa got very upset, and Bar Kamsa decided that he's going to create problems for the rest of the Jewish community, and he told the emperor, at that time, the emperor of the Romans, that he should send some sort of a korban, a sacrifice to be offered, and you'll see the Jews won't offer it, and they don't think well of you, and they look and they despise any offering that you're going to provide, and this is a big insult to the emperor. And then he surreptitiously placed a blemish, a very small blemish in the lip of the eye of the sacrifice that wouldn't typically be considered to be a blemish according to non-Jewish standards, but according to our standards would be. And as a result, they couldn't offer the korban. So they went to Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos, and they said to Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos, who was the reigning chacham, the reigning sage at the time, they said, maybe we should overlook this halakha, we should offer it anyway. He said, no, because then people will misinterpret the law in the future, or maybe then we should just kill Bar Kamsa so that the emperor won't know that the offering wasn't, sacrificed. He said, no, then they'll say that if you place a blemish in any sacrifice, then the appropriate punishment is to kill the person who placed the blemish, and that's against the Torah as well. And Rabbi Yochanan said that Misanuso shel Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos, the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulos, Haribes Beitenu B'Safes Heichaleinu B'Nisanu Me'artzenu, it caused our Beis Hamikdash to be destroyed, and it caused our the Holy of Holies to be burned, and it caused us to be exiled from our land. So what's going on in this story? So the Sifsei Chaim of Chaim Friedlander, who was the Mashgiach the Panovich, he explains, why do we say in the first place that the cause of the destruction was Kamsa Bar Kamsa? Why do we say the cause of the destruction was this host who, invited the wrong person to the meal and then threw him out? Why do we focus on Kamsa? Or we could say Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa ended up doing a not nice thing. Kamsa, he just didn't get invited. He didn't do anything. Kamsa doesn't figure in the story at all. So why do we say because Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, that's why the temple was destroyed, Yerushalayim was destroyed. So he explains that what does the word kamsa mean altogether? We speak about that we may take a kometz, you take a portion of an offering, a meal offering, and you put it on the mizbeach. You're separating one thing from another thing. The whole idea of kamsa and bar kamsa is that it created, the way in which friendships were created was in a way that automatically from the outset sowed a division. It sowed a sense of a fragmentation between people that you would deliberately take from two people. You'd say, this one is my friend, and this one is not my friend. The way that you became a friend was by being distinguished from somebody else who would not be that person's friend. It was like a form of miskabed v'kolon kavero. You were elevated at the expense of somebody else. If you would agree to be included in somebody's clique, it would be with the understanding that that was at the expense of insulting somebody else. So Kamsa, by agreeing in the first place to be a friend of this individual, understood that it was at the expense of Bar Kamsa, that this other person would be insulted in the process. But nobody minded that others would be insulted in the process as long as they were included in this exclusive club, whatever the exclusive club might be. And we all know sort of exclusive clubs in our own experiences, in our various adventures and endeavors in life. So therefore, Kamsa was also at fault in this case. And why is it that we're singling out Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas? All he did was uphold the Torah. He said you can't create a falsification or perversion of Torah law. In fact, Rabbi J. David Blythe, Shlita, says that this was actually an appropriate response from Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas. You're not supposed to pervert Torah law by doing something which the Torah says is absolutely prohibited. So why are we blaming Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas? If you look at the Medrash on Megillas Eicha, very beautiful. You're looking for something to do for the rest of Tisha B'Av. Like you have a long afternoon, before you get up to, the Menachem Begin movie in the afternoon. So you can take out a Medrash Eicha. It's hard to understand the Hebrew. You get a good, English translation. You probably find it online. And you go through Medrash Eicha. Beautiful, beautiful midrashim from beginning to end. Really give you a proper sense of, what it is that we're mourning this Tisha B'Av and the tragedies that led to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So it also tells the story of Medrash Eicha of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, but the criticism of Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas is very different. There's no discussion about different psukim that he made about whether you can offer the sacrifice or kill Bar Kamsa or anything of that sort. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas is mentioned in a different context. Remember I said that there were rabbis who were sitting there at the feast and they didn't say anything when this Bar Kamsa was being humiliated and ridiculed and it was being shamed by the owner by the host of the feast, who was throwing him out in front of Am Ha'eda, in front of everybody, and the rabbi sat and did nothing. The Medrash said, who was the chief rabbi sitting there? It was Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas. He was the chief rabbi who was sitting there. And that's what caused the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So how do you put together these two different episodes? You think about it. They were doing everything correctly, but there was one major sin, says the Gemara. That was the sin of sinas spinam. That was the sin of baseless hatred. There's a Gemara in Yoma that talks about how sometimes a person might have a taina. A person might have a defense before Kodesh Baruch Hu. He's brought there and they ask, why didn't you fulfill Torah properly? Why didn't you learn Torah during your lifetime? So a person might say, well, I was too poor and it was too difficult for me to carve out the time to learn Torah because it was just hard enough making ends meet. So the Gemara says that nobody's going to get away with that excuse because Hillel was very poor and Hillel learned Torah anyway. Hillel Machayev Aniyim. He's the one who causes all the poor people to be responsible. What about a person who says, I was very rich and therefore I had to look after all of my investments and I couldn't have any time to learn Torah because I had to make sure that my money was being properly watched and properly monitored. So the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsum had investments all over the place, but he learned lots of Torah. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsum was Mechayev HaShirim. He's the one who causes all of the Ashirim, who causes all of the rich people to be culpable if they didn't learn Torah properly. So I think what the message of this story is, Rabbi Zechariah ben Akulas, he was Mechayev himself. The excuse is that you can't speak up, but because it would have shared the entire simcha, if he would have made a fuss that this host was embarrassing this individual, he could stand up on behalf of Torah principles when he felt like it. When it came to the Bein Adam L'Makom questions of when it's appropriate to offer a korban, or what type of punishment we officially mete out according to our justice system, he was able to get up and he was able to stand up on behalf of Torah, which was appropriate. It was the proper thing to do. He was able to have that strength of character. However, that same strength of character has to be manifested on the Bein Adam L'Chaveru realm as well. You have to care about all of Klal Yisrael. You have to stand up on principle if a person is being embarrassed. this idea of standing up for a principle on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael, I think explains another Gemara that speaks about the Korban and the proper way to mourn for the Korban. Gemara in Baba Kama speaks about Eliezer Zivir. Eliezer Zivir, we don't know too much about him. What we know is that in the streets of Nahardach, he was walking around during the year with black shoes. Now, we don't think too much about black shoes because whatever color our shoes are. But in those days, you didn't wear black shoes unless you were a mourner. And he was wearing a black shoe. He wore black shoes until he wasn't a mourner. So the Reish Galusa, the house of the Reish Galusa, the officials of the head of the exilarch of the Golus, Babel, came to him, and they said, "My height, what are you doing wearing black shoes? This isn't like the time that we're all in mourning. We understand the period of the 3 weeks, everybody is in mourning over the Beis HaMikdash, but the rest of the year, that's not a time of mourning." So they thought that this was haughty, it was arrogant on his part to be mourning, even when it wasn't during the period of the 3 weeks. So he explained, "Don't worry, it's okay for me to do this because Gabar Rabba Ani. I'm a really great guy. I'm a really outstanding personality, and therefore for me, it's okay to mourn the rest of the year." So he said, "Well, we're going to put you to the test as to whether you're really a Gabar Rabba." It's the idea. You're a Gabar Rabba, it's okay, because most of us, we don't have the ability to necessarily represent that we have the requisite mindset during the entire year that we're always fully mourning the Beis HaMikdash. That's why we have to ease into it. When we get up to the 3 weeks, we start with the 3-week period in which there are no haircuts, no marriages, and then there's the 9-day period in which there's no laundering and there's no bathing, and then we gradually ease our way to the full intensity of Tisha B'Av, but we have to ease into it. Rav Soloveitchik used to point out that it was kind of like the opposite of the way that Avelos is normally mourned when somebody loses a close relative. So it starts with the intense mourning of Shiva, and then it becomes more relaxed over Shloshim, and then even more relaxed in terms of the nature of the prohibitions over the 12-month period. So in Avelos Yishana, when we're mourning the Beis HaMikdash, it's the opposite because it takes time for us to get to that requisite level of sensitivity towards the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, that requisite mindset of really being focused on what it is that we have lost. So most of the year we don't think that a person has that mindset, but a person is on a very high level, who's so connected to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, a person who's really somebody who's going to be Mis'avel Yerushalayim with their full heart and with all of their mind and with all of their senses. So such a person is a Gabar Rabba, yes. So it would be okay for them to be in a state of mourning over the Beis HaMikdash the rest of the year because we don't think that they're faking it. We don't think that it is something which is only being done superciliously or a mistake of self-promotion, but that the person, if they're on a very high level, so then they have the right to evidence that type of mourning. So how did he prove to the Reish Galusa, to the officers of the Reish Galusa, of the head exilarch of the diaspora, how did he prove that he was really a Gabar Rabba? So they put him in jail, and they said, "We're not going to let you out of jail until you can prove this to us." So he said, "Okay, so you know what? You can ask me a tough question, or I'll ask you a tough question." So he said, "Okay, you ask us a tough question." He said, "Okay, fine. Here's the question. The question is that you have a person who causes harm to another individual's unripe dates. A person has date trees, and now somebody else somehow destroys the unripe dates on this person's akufa, the unripe dates on this person's date tree. So how much should he have to pay for the dates?" So they answered, "Well, he should probably pay for whatever is the value of dates." So he answered, "But these are unripe dates; they're not, ripe yet." So they said, "Well, then have him pay for the value of unripe dates." So he said, "No, but eventually these dates were going to become ripe." So they said, "Okay, fine, you stumped us. You answer the question." So the Gemara says he gave an answer to the question. He said, "You got to look at the entire field. You got to look at the entire field, and you measure it in accordance with Shishim, 60 measures. And you look at the 60 measures of the entire field, and how valuable it is for a person to have dates within that field that are eventually going to become right, because when you're looking at the entire picture, so then it becomes part of the analysis. You're investing in an entire area of how much that this particular section is going to be worth. And if you have that entire field, you figure out what is the total loss that would have been created to the overall value as a result of the damage that was done. And they said, okay, that sounds pretty impressive, but we don't know for sure that you're absolutely correct, because we didn't have a clue how to answer this question. Is there anybody who agrees with you? He said, yeah. If you ask Shmuel, who's considered to be the greatest dayan in the area, you'll find that he agrees with me. So they asked Shmuel, Shmuel said, yeah, he's right. He said, hey, I guess you are a Gavra Rabbi. After all, they let him go. So what in the world was going on with this question and answer regarding the date trees? Does the date tree relate to the story? Does it not relate to the story? So I would submit that it does relate to exactly why somebody would be a Gavra Rabbi in this respect. And I think that the message is the following. When we have the term Shishim, Shishim is sometimes a reference for a microcosm of all of Klal Yisrael. We speak about Shishim Ribo. You see 600,000 Jews in one place, so you make a Bacha Chacham HaRezim. You make a special blessing. There were 600 adult male Jews who were present when the Torah was given at Har Sinai. We said, you got to look at the entirety of Klal Yisrael. We have unripe dates at this point in time. We're not so perfect. And therefore, that's troubling, and it's disturbing, and we're in a state where it doesn't look like we necessarily are reaching our potential. But if you have that sensitivity that these unripe dates will someday reach that potential of being ripe dates, so then you can have the proper perspective in terms of how to view Klal Yisrael, how to view our state right here and now, that it's appropriate for us to mourn in order to bring back our potential of what we can be. But you can only do that if you look at the entire Shishim. If you have the requisite, perspective that you care about the entirety of the Jewish people, if you care about the entirety of the Jewish people, the entire Shishim, the entire picture, you'll be able to take those unripe dates and you'll be able to bring them to their appropriate state of ripeness. And I think this is perhaps the perspective that we all need to have, not only during the 3 weeks, but a perspective to have during the entire year, like Eliezer Ze'ira, that perspective that we're looking at all of Klal Yisrael. We're not only looking at a small section of the orchard, in a small section of the field that pertains specifically to us. When we look at the entire field, we look at the entire landscape, we look at the entirety of Klal Yisrael, we make sure that we care about each and every member of Klal Yisrael, then we can have the appropriate passion to beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, when we care about everybody and we don't just look at the flaws, we don't just look at all the deficiencies, but we look at the potential of what we can become. But we can only reach that full potential if we do it together, if we recognize that we are one singular unit and that we have to care about everybody and not just those individuals who are in our small clique, as the case may be. Now, if you continue to look at the Gemara, you'll see that the Gemara doesn't stop there in terms of enumerating the various sins that led to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. There is a long ledger in the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis, that has a giant laundry list of various sins that led to the destruction of Yerushalayim. So the Maharan Shik asks, why do we have this? We already have the Gemara in Yoma that says the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of the 3 cardinal sins, and it wasn't brought back. They weren't able to repent because they didn't have a proper respect for Torah. And we have the Gemara that speaks about it. The second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of the fact that we have sinas chinam, that we don't care about each other enough. So why do I need all these other reasons? So it explains that sometimes a person ends up with a disease, and you could say that they have the following disease, but you need to identify the various symptoms, not only the symptoms, the causes of the disease, in order to be able to cure it, in order to be able to address it. So you have to look at what are the components that led to the person having all of these symptoms, of having all of these problems in the first place. So the Gemara gives about 5 different reasons that I want to just go through briefly during the time that we have left, so that we can focus on repairing these reasons as well. Because says the Maharam Shik, if you repair each one of these, so these prevent us from having this ultimate problem of a lack of a perspective of keeping Torah properly, and a lack of respecting each other and loving each other appropriately as well. The verse that the Gemara gives is Chilul Shabbos. Chilul Shabbos. We know that the Gemara says that a person who's Machal Shabbos, but perhaps a person who publicly violates Shabbos, and so such a person is considered to be like Dino Ka'akum. In certain ways, we don't even view the person as a full-fledged member of Klal Yisrael. We've reached the point where I think that our dullness of the senses, in terms of seeing so many Jews out there who are Machal Shabbos, has become so routine that we don't have the requisite we don't have the requisite passion to bring people back into Shabbos observance. I remember that there was a rabbi, the chief rabbi of South Africa. What's his name?
Warren Goldstein. Rabbi Goldstein.
Rabbi Warren Goldstein. Rabbi Warren Goldstein introduced a project of just one Shabbos. Of keeping one Shabbos for a person who's not observant, and everybody who is observant should invite over a non-observant person for a Shabbos just so they can enjoy and perceive the beauty of a Shabbos. And apparently it was a very successful project. We tried to do it here in America. We had one such a Shabbos here in Chicago. It seemed to me like it was not a tremendous hit. I think that one of the reasons why it may not have been such a tremendous hit is because we're not connected enough. We don't have a sufficient relationship with those who are Machal Shabbos, or at least not a relationship where we would feel comfortable saying to them, oh, I think you really should keep Shabbos more. I think that this is something that you should really strive to do more carefully, that you should strive to do more scrupulously. So this is also something that has to be a heightened sense of Shabbos sensitivity. The Gemara, the Rambam, in various places, puts together the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and how we should still have a sense of awe in the Harabayas. There's some articles now about people going up today on Tisha B'Av to the Harabayas. You should have a sense, we don't talk about that, you should have a sense of awe for the Harabayas of the Temple Mount, even when the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, because the Kedusha is forever. It says the Rambam, just like Shabbos, with the Kedusha is forever. What's the connection? So some of the commentaries explain the connection is that this is a kedusha, it's a holiness which is endowed upon us by a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That it gives us, a Kadosh Baruch Hu gives us spiritual help by recharging our batteries. Every 7 days when we have Shabbos, it recharges our spiritual batteries the same way that the Beis Hamikdash recharges our batteries. That's why Yaakov was criticized. When Yaakov was traveling from Beersheba to Haran, when he was traveling to be with Laban so that he could work with him and find a wife. So it says that he passed the place of the Beis Hamikdash, and then when he realized that he did such a thing, that he shouldn't have passed the place of the Beis Hamikdash without stopping and davening, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped him, created a pizza sederach, and created some sort of a magical path for him to be able to travel back very quickly, like through a flying carpet or flying ladder, to come back to the Beis Hamikdash to be able to daven. And why did he pass the Beis Hamikdash originally? So Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler, in his Mitzvah Eliyahu, said he thought he didn't need help from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reach a high spiritual state. So he didn't need to daven in the Beis Hamikdash. Then he got to Haran, and he saw what a wasteland it was in terms of spirituality. He realized, I need that boost. I need that recharge. I need that new battery from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's why he realized, I got to get back. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped him, to give him that boost. So we have to have that same sense that we want that Shabbos boost, and we want all of Klal Yisrael to have that Shabbos boost. I mean, we all know the famous story of the Chafetz Chaim, where there was a Talmud in the yeshiva who was found smoking a cigar on Shabbos, and everybody wanted to throw him out of the yeshiva, and everybody wanted to penalize him and get rid of him and so forth. The Chafetz Chaim said, just bring him in. And he came into the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim just started crying, and he said, Shabbos, Shabbos, Shabbos. And this fellow saw the Chafetz Chaim. It might not work if I did it. But he saw the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim had such spirituality emanating from him, and he's such a tzaddik, he was so righteous in every way. It wasn't just like some sort of a ploy that he was like acting it out. He cared so much about Shabbos that every single year should keep Shabbos. So that's what inspired this person to start keeping Shabbos, and to stop violating Shabbos. We have to have that same sensitivity. The next category that's listed is Bitul Kriya Shema Shachris V'Arvis. They did not recite Kriya Shema in the morning or the evening. So it's a very interesting comment by the Maharsha. The Maharsha says that this is going chronologically. They didn't keep Shabbos properly. And he said this is also speaking about after Shabbos. What day after Shabbos? Sunday morning. He said that after Shabbos, so just like they didn't keep Shabbos properly, they didn't keep Motzei Shabbos properly. Motzei Shabbos, instead of finding a Seder, learning in the Beis Medrash, they went out to a movie, they went out for pizza, they went bowling, they got drunk. So because of that, they slept late on Sunday morning, and they didn't recite Kriya Shema at the proper time on Sunday morning. And that's why this comes right after Chilul Shabbos. So it's the same idea of just having the requisite mentality that everything that you do in life, whether it's Shabbos or the way in which you start the new week, should be focused upon Torah observance, should be focused upon doing mitzvahs, doing chesed, learning Torah, and that's the way that you should begin the week as well. Not that you engage in activities that are going to take you away from reciting Shema at the proper time. You know, it's like we had at the CRC a couple of years ago, we had to determine when they made marijuana kosher, well not kosher, but legal. They made marijuana legal, whether we should start giving hashgacha on recreational marijuana products. Because after all, you can make sure that it's also kosher and it's legal, so what's so terrible? So Moshe Feinstein said that even if it's going to be legal to ingest recreational marijuana, it's not going to be kosher. And why is it not going to be kosher? He wasn't worried about the bugs in the leaves. He said it's not going to be kosher because the whole purpose of people smoking marijuana and taking marijuana is as an escape. It's an escape so that they're not going to focus on their responsibilities in life, and they're not going to perform Torah and mitzvahs, because if they're escaping from everything else, they're going to escape from Torah and mitzvahs as well. And then therefore, how can we possibly give a hashgacha on that? That's the idea over here of Shebidlu Kriya Shema Shachris Ve'Arvis. Another possible explanation is that they didn't focus on the mission statement of what it meant to be Jewish. That they didn't have as their primary focus, everything I have to do in life centers around Shema. I heard a shir once from the great Charlie Harari, in which he was asking the question, what is the mission statement of Judaism? Because he said every company to be successful, he's a big businessman, every company to be successful in the world, they have to have a mission statement. Everything that they do is focused on the mission statement. And the more concise and clear and succinct the mission statement is, the better, assuming you have the right mission statement. Because then every single decision that you make revolves around the mission statement, and you can stay focused. He said, what's the mission statement of Judaism? He said, the mission statement is obvious. We find it all over the place. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's our mission statement. That's a bitlu Kriya Shema Shachris Ve'Arvis. They didn't order their life around their mission statement. And then next statement, very poignant for our times. Shebidlu Tinoka Shebeis Rabbi. They didn't focus on Jewish education for their children. The Gemara in Shabbos says, Eina Olam Miskayim El Al Hevel P'Piyam Shel Tinoka Shebeis Rabbi. That the world only exists, the world is only sustained because of the prattle of the children who go to cheder, the children who go to yeshiva, the words that come out of their mouth, it's completely pure and untainted. That's what keeps us going as a people. It was a very, very strong statement that was made several years ago by an Afghan in the community in Lakewood, where he said that we've lost our focus tremendously when it comes to this priority of Tinoka Shebeis Rabbi. It used to be, and I remember this when I was growing up as well, that no kid was left behind. That every single child who wanted to learn in yeshiva, you found a place for them in yeshiva. And now you have yeshivas that are like exclusivity clubs, where people say, oh, I'm not going to send my child, if this child is going to be in yeshiva, it has to be on a certain level. There can't be certain kids who are off the beaten path. They can't be in the yeshiva. So he got up and he said the following. He said, many of us have created a new Torah, a new Yiddishkeit.
and it makes us feel good about ourselves, but has little to do with Hashem's Torah that He gave us 3,000 years ago. We turned our Frumkeit into an idol, and we have forgotten some of the basic tenets of Yiddishkeit. In terms of the exclusion of children from schools, where the parents are crying at night because the schools won't accept their children because they don't fit in to a certain model, to a certain perspective that school has, despite the fact that the parents want so much to send their children to school. We have to rectify this because according to the Gemara, this is one of the reasons why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Al-Shebitlu and Tinokos Shel-Beis Rabbi. Then, finally, we have Ula, who says that it was because that Lo Hayulam Boshes Panim Zem Mizeh, that people had no embarrassment towards each other. They would commit the most terrible offenses against each other and not be embarrassed about it. We know about the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, the 24,000 Talmidim who died, Ashlonavu, Kavod Zeh Bezeh, because they didn't treat each other with a basic respect. That we don't have that sense of what the Gemara characterizes as the essential attributes of the Jewish personality by Shanim, Bachmanim, Megomlei, Chasadim, that we're people who are bashful, we're people who are modest, we're people who are compassionate. They didn't have that pushta, they didn't have that sense of modesty, that sense of shame towards each other to do the most terrible, the vile things towards each other. So we have to bring back that sense of shame. And then the two more mentioned in the Gemara. One is Shehishlu Katan V'Gadol, that they equated the young and the old, that they did not have the requisite cover. They did not have the requisite respect for those who are more senior, those who are more veteran, those who are bigger Talmidei Chachamim. It goes together with another statement, Shebizu Talmidei Chachamim. They acted in a fashion which was disrespectful to Talmidei Chachamim. That we know that when there isn't this sense of hierarchy, the young respecting the old, and those who don't know as much respecting the Talmidei Chachamim, so it creates a tremendous sense of confusion. The Gemara speaks about ibubia, that when Moshe Rabbeinu said when the people wanted to send scouts and spies into Eretz Yisrael, but everybody came together. The young were pushing the old, and the less learned were pushing the more learned. There was no sense of respect. There was no sense of protocol. When you lose that sense of protocol, so you lose the sense of protocol towards the Kadosh Baruch Hu as well. We have to have that sense of basic respect towards the elderly, towards the more senior, towards the more accomplished. We can't just follow in the ways of the world around us, where younger is automatically considered to be superior. We have the principle of Sha'al Avicha V'Yageitcha Zekenecha V'Yomolach. We want to know what to do, so those who are closer to the source are considered to be holier. A person's supposed to say, Matai Yediu Masai Masei Abosai. When am I going to be like that of my ancestors? Not when am I going to be like that of my descendants? So I have to, figure out what are they focusing upon in their, pop culture and their, terminology and expressions, and try to be cool like them. No, real cool is to be like the old bogies. So that's very important. Okay. And then the last one is that Al Shepashku Mehem Anshe Amono. That honesty became a lonely word. That when it came to business practices, people just did not act with a sense of honesty and integrity. The Gemara says, despite the fact that when it came to Torah learning, they acted with a sense of integrity. They were very firm inside of the base medrash and very fine and honest about what they knew and what they didn't know and so forth. And it was all very impressive. But once they go out into the street and engage in their business practices, somehow all bets were off. So this, it says the Gemara, is a hideous way of acting. And in fact, it's an explanation. The Gemara says that when a person, after 120 years, goes up to Shemayim, what's the first thing that they get asked? They get asked, Nasasa v'nasata b'emunah, do you conduct your business transactions honestly? And the second question is whether kabati itim l'Torah, did you set aside time to learn Torah? Tosas asks, but it says elsewhere that the first thing that a person is judged upon is their Torah learning. So why is the first question whether you conducted your business practices honestly? So I think the answer is obvious. The answer is that if you don't conduct your business practices honestly, obviously you weren't really learning Torah all that time. Because if you're learning Torah properly, so a proper learning of Torah causes you to translate, as we said at the very beginning, the Torah learning into the Torah living. So what we really have to do in order to be Mekayim, in order to fulfill this edict that we are mourning the Beis HaMikdash properly, so we can be Zocher V'Ra'ah V'Simchasa, so we can merit to be able to see in the joy of Yerushalayim, is that we have to reverse all of these trends. We have to have a compassion and a caring for all of Klal Yisrael, for every single member of Klal Yisrael. We can't view ourselves as only part of one particular community and one particular clique, but we have to care about the spiritual welfare of every single member of Klal Yisrael. That's number one. Number two, we have to make sure that our focus upon Torah learning is a real focus. And it's not just something which is a cause for status, improvement within the community or being accepted by a certain segment of the community, but it has to be sincere Torah learning that translates into Torah living, that translates into honesty in our business practices, that translates into integrity in terms of the way in which we run our communal institutions, that translates into our caring about every single member of society, all of those who are vulnerable and defenseless, and all of those who need our care, to make sure that nobody is treated unjustly. And we have to uphold the standards of what it really means to be from not only in the privacy of our own homes, but in terms of spreading the beauty of Judaism, spreading the beauty of keeping Shabbos, spreading the beauty of a Torah lifestyle to the entire Jewish community, to the broader Jewish community. And we have to do it with a sense of a mission towards the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, recognizing that we have to tap HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to dive into HaKadosh Baruch Hu and tap the resources that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us for help in terms of reaching the fullest possible potential. And God willing, when we get around next year to Tisha B'Av, I'll be addressing you in Yerushalayim, in the rebuilt Beis HaMikdash, and we'll be talking about all of the things that we've done correctly this past year, so we can continue to reinforce our efforts to continue to do things correctly, so we should be zocher to not only the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, but the coming of the Mashiach and the Geula Shlema Me'er B'Yameinu. Amen.